The night split open with a roar of thunder. Cinderella's slipper struck the marble steps as she fled the palace, heart hammering against the silk confines of her gown. Behind her, music spilled from golden windows like liquid light, fading into the distance with every desperate step. The clock tolled again, heavy and relentless, each chime peeling away the fragile dream she'd borrowed for one enchanted evening. Rain thickened, cold needles against her flushed cheeks. She gasped, clutching the skirt that tangled around her legs, unaware that destiny was bending in the storm. A flash of lightning tore across the heavens, jagged and white. It struck the carriage waiting below, shattering the air with a deafening crack. The enchanted horses reared, their harnesses glowing. Magic, once elegant and controlled, twisted wild. A vortex bloomed where moonlight touched the wet stones, a swirling column of gold and ash, humming with a power older than her kingdom itself. Her foot skidded on the slick stair. She reached for the rail, missed, and tumbled forward into the light. The world dissolved into soundless motion. Her breath ripped from her lungs as wind folded around her, dragging her through a tunnel that smelled of cedar and smoke. Stars spun. Colors bled together. Then, abruptly, the storm vanished. She hit the ground hard, knees sinking into warm sand. Above stretched a sky painted in violent shades of orange and crimson, the sun bleeding into a jagged horizon. For a long moment, she could only kneel, dizzy and disoriented. The palace was gone. The carriages, the music, the prince, vanished as if swallowed by time. Heat pressed down on her, dry and heavy. Her gown, once pristine, now carried streaks of dust. She stood slowly, brushing trembling hands against her skirt, listening. In the distance, drums pulsed, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat buried beneath the earth. She stumbled toward the sound, drawn by instinct more than reason. The landscape stretched wide and raw, dotted with twisted shrubs and towering cliffs that caught the last light like blades. Somewhere ahead, horses whinnied. A sharp snap broke the quiet. She froze. At her feet lay a steel trap, teeth glinting. Her breath hitched. One more step and she would have been caught. Hooves thundered. Figures emerged from the shadows, riders on horseback, their faces painted, their spears raised. Dust swirled around them as they encircled her. Panic clawed at her throat. She tried to back away, but they tightened the ring. A warrior barked a command she couldn't understand. A spear tip lifted her chin. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought they might hear it. They exchanged quick, tense words. Confusion flickered across their faces at the sight of her gown, her pale skin, the fragile glass slipper glittering beneath the blood-red sky. Finally, one motioned sharply. Rough hands seized her arms, pulling her toward the setting sun. She twisted in vain, searching for escape, but the horizon held only shadows. As the drums grew louder, a figure stepped into view atop a distant rise. He stood tall, a silhouette carved against the dying light. Even from afar, his presence silenced the riders. The leader. His gaze locked onto hers, unblinking and fierce, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. The wind stilled. The world narrowed to that single, searing look. And without a word, everything in her life tilted. Night fell swiftly, swallowing the horizon in a deep, velvety dark. Torches flickered along the edges of the encampment, their flames bending in the dry wind, casting halos that danced across weathered hides and carved totems. Cinderella was led through a narrow path between tents, her wrists bound loosely, guarded by riders who watched her with wary fascination. Smoke from a central fire curled upward in slow spirals, filling the air with the sharp scent of pine and roasted meat. Every sound, the distant cry of a coyote, the rhythmic thud of drums, seemed amplified, foreign, and intimate all at once. They brought her before the man from the ridge. He waited beside the largest tent, standing tall with a stillness that commanded attention. Up close, his features emerged from shadow. High cheekbones marked by faint scars, dark eyes that held the calm intensity of someone accustomed to command. He wore a mantle of leather and feathers, simple yet powerful, like the desert itself. He studied her in silence. The warriors shifted uneasily, as if even they were unsure how to explain this strange girl conjured from nowhere. The elder of the group spoke rapidly, gesturing toward her torn gown and glittering shoes. His tone hovered between reverence and suspicion. The chief listened, gaze never leaving her face. She couldn't understand their words, but she understood the weight behind them. Every motion, every pause, pressed against her like invisible hands. Her heart thudded unevenly. She lifted her chin, refusing to cower. She had bowed for stepmothers and nobles. She would not bow here. The chief finally stepped closer, so close she could smell the faint trace of smoke on his skin. He circled her slowly, examining the strange fabric, the shimmering glass at her feet, the wild confusion in her eyes. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone laughed sharply. Another hissed in warning. The tension crackled like dry branches underfoot. A young girl pushed through the crowd then, half her hair braided in tribal fashion, the rest loose. Her voice carried hesitant, accented words. "I speak your tongue," she said, eyes darting nervously toward the chief. "Some from traders." Relief surged through Cinderella so suddenly she almost collapsed. "Where am I?" she whispered. The girl translated. The answer came like a drumbeat, a place far from any kingdom she knew, beyond deserts and mountains, a time older than the palace she'd fled. The chief listened as Cinderella stumbled through her story. How she had danced at a ball, how the storm swallowed her, how she landed beneath a blood-red sky. He showed no disbelief, only quiet calculation, as though destiny itself had walked into his camp. One warrior barked something harsh. The girl's face paled as she translated. "He says, you should be claimed, taken, given to the strong." A murmur of agreement spread. Cinderella's stomach twisted. The chief's voice cut through the noise. Deep, commanding. The crowd fell silent. He spoke slowly, decisively. "She stays." The words struck the air like a blade. Cinderella didn't understand their full weight, but she recognized authority when she heard it. He had chosen to protect her, or to keep her. She couldn't tell which. As she was led to a smaller tent under the watch of flickering torches, she glanced back. The chief still stood there, watching her disappear into the night. His expression was unreadable, but something fierce lingered in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken despite herself. The drums resumed their steady beat, echoing the rhythm rising in her chest, and she understood that this night had not ended anything. It had only begun. The first scream tore through the night like a blade. Cinderella jerked upright inside the dim tent, her heart slamming against her ribs. Outside, the steady drumbeats had shifted into a chaotic rhythm, punctuated by shouts and the thunder of hooves. Shadows flitted across the tent walls, warriors rushing to arms, fires flaring brighter as if sensing the oncoming storm. She stumbled to the entrance, clutching the flap with trembling hands, and stared out into a night transformed. Flames licked the edges of the encampment. Arrows streaked through the darkness like falling stars, embedding in the sand with sickening thuds. Horses reared, their cries sharp against the roar of approaching enemies. Warriors surged toward the outer boundary, their movements swift and practiced, spears catching the torchlight in sudden flashes. For a heartbeat, fear froze her to the spot. She didn't belong here. She didn't understand the rules of this world. But the sight of terrified children scrambling for shelter snapped her out of her stupor. Instinct surged where knowledge faltered. She darted toward a group of frightened youngsters huddled behind a stack of crates. Her gown tangled around her legs as she knelt, urging them toward a safer alcove behind the tents. A flaming arrow struck nearby, scattering sand into her face. She coughed, eyes stinging from smoke, but kept moving, pulling the smallest child by the hand. A memory rose unbidden. Her stepmother's ballroom, where fear was silent and cruel. This fear, raw and urgent, made her pulse roar with life. A warrior fell near her, clutching his side. His sling slipped from limp fingers. Without thinking, she seized it. She had watched her stepfather's stable hands use similar weapons on stray dogs. Her aim wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. She hurled a stone toward an attacker advancing near the tents. It struck his shoulder, staggering him long enough for a defender to intervene. Another stone, another distraction. She moved quickly, dirt streaking her once pristine gown, smoke swirling around her like a tattered cloak. Through the chaos, she spotted the chief. He fought on horseback near the boundary, his silhouette fierce against the inferno. Two attackers closed in from opposite sides. Her chest tightened as she saw the spear strike. His horse reared, throwing him to the ground. He rolled, rising to meet his assailants, but a third figure appeared behind him, blade poised. Without thinking, she ran. Her feet pounded the sand, breath burning her throat. She grabbed a torch from the ground, swung it wildly, and slammed it into the attacker's side. Flames caught on his cloak, and he stumbled back, cursing. She reached the chief, dragging him toward cover as arrows hissed past. His blood streaked her hands, warm and terrifyingly real. When the fighting finally ebbed, dawn bled slowly over the camp. Smoke curled into the pale sky, and the air smelled of ash and victory. Cinderella sat near the fire, exhausted, knees scraped, hair tangled, hands still shaking. The chief approached, his arm bound, gaze steady. Through the translator, his words reached her like embers in the cold morning. "You fought," he said simply. "Not like a spirit. Like fire." Her breath caught. For the first time, she didn't feel lost. She felt alive. The tribe gathered around, whispering her new name with a mix of awe and amusement. *Firewoman Star. The sound carried on the wind, mingling with the crackle of dying flames. She met the chief's gaze, a silent current passing between them, something fragile yet undeniable. Whatever path lay ahead, she knew the night had changed her forever. The dawn arrived gently, as though reluctant to disturb what the night had set in motion. Pale light crept across the encampment, revealing the aftermath of the battle in muted tones. Scorched sand, broken weapons, and exhausted warriors tending to their wounded. Smoke lingered like a ghost over the village, curling into the cooling air. Cinderella stood at the edge of the camp, her once glittering gown now torn and darkened with ash. She stared toward the horizon, where a faint shimmer pulsed between two ancient stones. The translator had called it the spirit portal. It waited silently, as if inviting her to decide whether her presence here was a miracle or a passing dream. Behind her, the tribe gathered in hushed clusters, their gazes sharp with expectation. The elders spoke among themselves, glancing her way with solemn eyes. They had given her until sunrise to choose, return to the world she'd come from, or stay and bind herself to this one. Her pulse thrummed like a drumbeat, steady and insistent, as she considered the weight of either path. A soft crunch of sand announced his arrival. The chief approached slowly, his arm still bandaged from the night's fight, movements marked by quiet strength. For once, there was no crowd between them, no fire, no chaos, just the stillness of early morning. His presence carried the same gravity it had the night they met, but something in his gaze had shifted. The fierce watchfulness remained, yet beneath it lay something fragile, almost hesitant. He stopped a few paces away, searching her face as though trying to memorize it. "You have a choice," the translator murmured, echoing his words. "To leave or to stay." She looked back toward the portal, its glow steady, unwavering. If she stepped through, perhaps she'd wake up outside the palace, the storm merely a strange memory. But that world felt distant now, hollow compared to the raw immediacy of this one. Here, she wasn't a forgotten girl in a kitchen or a stranger at a ball. She was someone who had bled, fought, and been seen. "I don't belong to either world," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant it as a lament or a revelation. The chief stepped closer. His voice lowered, the translator barely keeping pace. "I cannot ask you to stay. But since you came, the camp breathes differently. I breathe differently." The admission hung between them, unexpected and unguarded. Her throat tightened. She thought of the girl who had stumbled down palace stairs, terrified of losing borrowed magic. That girl had been swept by fate. The woman standing here now could choose. She turned back to him slowly, and a quiet smile softened her features. "I've already decided," she said. The translator's voice carried her words, and a ripple spread through the watching crowd. Murmurs rose, then cheers. The chief's expression broke into something fierce and bright, as if a storm had finally cleared. He extended his hand. She placed hers in it without hesitation. As the sun lifted fully above the cliffs, drums began to beat, a low, resonant rhythm that echoed through the camp. The tribe moved to encircle them, singing in tones that vibrated through the earth. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Cinderella met his gaze, and for once, there was no magic tricking the hour, no looming midnight. There was only this moment, sharp and alive. And though the portal still shimmered behind her, she didn't look back.